2 is called Two Pennies and a Lollipop. Now, again, this is a chapter story, so there's not a lot of pictures. Okay, everyone show me you're ready to be great listeners. When Lily awoke the next morning, her grandmother was getting dressed to go to work. Stay in bed, Lily. You don't have to get up so early. Today is Saturday, Grandma said. Don't you remember, Grandma? Today I have to earn money for Miss Liberty. Liberty, Liberty, that's all the ladies at the shop talk about. They say rich people should pay for the pedestal. I say we should pay for the pedestal too. That way the statue will belong to all of us. You said that, Grandma. You said that, Grandma? I said it and I meant it. Oh, Grandma, I love you. After breakfast, Lily went downstairs and out onto the sidewalk. She could tell that it was going to be a warm day. The street sprinkler was coming up the street, pulled slowly by an old white horse. Sprays of water were coming out of the bottom of the tank and wetting the dusty cobblestones. Mr. Ames was sitting on top of a big tank under his umbrella. So, Lily, nice day, eh? Lily walked alongside the tank, feeling the trickle of spray on her legs. Do you know any work I could do, Mr. Ames? You're too young to work, Lily. Get back now. You're going to get all wet. But I want to earn money for Miss Liberty's pedestal, Lily said. Why don't rich people pay for it? Those money kings are too tight-fisted, that's why. Mr. Ames slapped the reins on the horse and began to trot down the street. Lily turned back. First, she would look for Otto, who lived in the basement apartment 2 buildings down the block. He was just coming up the steps as Lily reached his house. Otto, can I help you sweep the sidewalk? What for, Lily? Sweeping is one of my jobs. But I need to earn some money, Lily said. Is it money you want? I have no money to spare, little lady. I have too many mouths to feed. It's true about the mouths, Lily thought. Mr. and Mrs. Dorfman had 6 children. Lily headed for Mr. Kaminsky's apartment. He lived 4 houses down from Otto's building, on the first floor. Mr. Kaminsky came to the door when Lily knocked. Would you like me to walk your dog for you today, Mr. Kaminsky? No, Lily. This is a beautiful day, and I need the exercise. Come again when it rains, Mr. Kaminsky said, closing the door. Lily walked back towards her house. She still hadn't tried Miss Casella's grocery store. Just as she was passing her building, her mother leaned out the window. Lily, Mrs. Rosen isn't feeling well. Will you bring her some chicken soup? I don't want to leave Charlie alone. Yes, Mama. Lily went upstairs to get the soup. When she reached Mrs. Rosen's apartment, she rang the bell. A faint voice answered. Who's there? There's a picture on this page. Lily opened the door. It's me, Lily. Mrs. Rosen was lying in bed. I don't feel so well today, she said. Here's some soup my mama made, Mrs. Rosen. Lily put the bowl on the table near the bed and turned to go. Oh, Lily, could you go to Mrs. Casella's and get me a bottle of milk and 6 eggs? Mrs. Rosen reached into her purse. Here is the money. Lily closed Mrs. Rosen's door and headed down the block towards Mrs. Casella's grocery store. Just as she was passing Seymour's butcher shop, she heard, Oh, Lily, you've come just in time. Will you do me a favor and mind Sheila while I go in and get some chicken? It was her mother's friend, Mrs. Murphy. Mrs. Murphy didn't wait for Lily's answer. She opened the butcher shop door and went inside, leaving Lily and Sheila in her carriage. In the minute Mrs. Murphy disappeared into the butcher shop, Sheila began to cry. Lily leaned over the carriage and tried to make funny faces, but Sheila cried even louder. So that's Lily and little baby Sheila. Look at that stroller. That looks very different than the strollers we have today, huh? What did you do to your little sister? Asked a woman who was passing by. She's not my sister, Lily said, knocking on the window of the butcher shop to get Mrs. Murphy's attention. Mrs. Murphy waved. Sheila cried even louder. An old woman stopped and shook her head. Tisk, tisk, tisk. At last, Mrs. Murphy came out. When Sheila saw her mother, she stopped crying and began to smile. What a good girl you are, Sheila, said Mrs. Murphy. Then she turned to Lily. Thank you, dear. Here's a lollipop for you and one for Sheila. Lily wished it were a nickel instead, but she thanked Mrs. Murphy and continued on to the grocery store. When Lily arrived at Mrs. Casella's, she saw her friend Dino behind the counter. Her heart sank. Hi, Dino. What are you doing here? I'm working for Mrs. Casella, Dina said. Does she need anyone else, you think? Lily asked timidly. Oh, no, Dino replied. She only needs one helper, and that's me. Lily bought the eggs and milk and hurried back to her building. Mrs. Rosen was sitting up in bed. Thank you, dear, she said. She reached over to get her purse on the table. Here, Lily, for you. Lily looked at the 2 pennies Mrs. Rosen offered her. Thank you, Mrs. Rosen. Well, I'd better be going now. Lily slowly climbed the stairs to her apartment. Mama was right. It was going to be much harder to earn money than she had thought. 2 pennies and a lollipop. That was not enough money to bring into school on Monday. What was she going to do? And there's sad Lily walking up the steps to her apartment. The next chapter, which we'll read tomorrow, is called 14 Crowns. So I will read this one tomorrow, record it, and I'll send it out to you guys.